Maybe. All right. Hey, everybody. We're going to try this going live today on YouTube and Twitter. I hope this works out well. We're going to have in here, you can see Vlad Costea, host of the Bitcoin Takeover. Yeah, look, I got mine too. I got mine.
Oh,
My co-host Animal in here again today. So we're gonna try this out. Hopefully it works. If you can, I think, comment, you can come on to YouTube. I'm not sure if the Twitter comments work. Vlad does these more than I do. 22, is that a donation? Is that a donation QR code?
no, it's where you can actually download the magazine for free.
Oh,
It's bitcoin-takeover.com/litecoin, and you can read this for free. So you don't have to. I mean, you can print it yourself. It's an open source project. That's the beauty of it. But I want people to read this because, of course, I'm being selfish and self-absorbed and whatever. But I think it's pretty good content to onboard people to Litecoin and explain why it's a useful open source money project.
yeah. I mean, I'll kind of get into how this came to be. Actually, here's the page where you have to donate. If anybody wants to donate for Vlad's magazine, for making this magazine, you can use that QR code, pause it and scan it. I do want to get into kind of how you came to be I don't even know what you call yourself anymore, whether you even want to identify
Oh,
yourself.
I'm a Bitcoin maximalist. I'm the ultimate Bitcoin maximalist
Okay.
because I'm looking at technology not from a dogmatic point of view, but more from a point of view where I search for stuff that can improve Bitcoin.
Right.
So that's what people don't understand. They think, oh, I'm being trolly. I'm being this horrible shitcoiner who's getting paid by whatever conspiracy theory they make up. But at the end of the day, I try to improve this project, which I love. And for that, I sort of lost faith in the people who LARP all day and they say, oh, Bitcoin only, pay me to build this, and then they ship nothing. And of course, the free market is much better at building stuff as opposed to just clique of developers and conference attendees who like to talk big words about what Bitcoin is and what it does. But then years pass and you realize that nothing's really getting built. And you realize that Lightning has been a bitter disappointment. And you realize that not much of what was promised was actually delivered. We were supposed to have side chains, we were supposed to have much better on chain privacy. I remember at one point there was this hype about pay to endpoint that was supposed to be this technology that ends blockchain analysis, which goes back all the way to pay to IP, which was the first way to actually make Bitcoin payments. And also, I remember when Taproot was being advertised as this improvement that's going to destroy blockchain analysis because transactions are going to be indistinguishable from one another. And so far, it only works for a certain type of multi-sigs, which barely have wallet support. So it's just that there's this culture of complacency, and I guess people are drunk in their number go up stasis, and they need to wake up. And there are other open source projects which are doing all the good work, and they're proving how stuff is supposed to work and that it's safe and that it has market demand. And sometimes when you really like a girl and you're chasing her and she's not paying attention to you, it's good to go after her friend. You know how it works?
Oh
You
yeah.
go
Yeah,
after her
it's
friend,
funny you
and then
say that.
she will think about you all the time.
I've been thinking that about you because you've been very, I would say, purposely harping on the privacy thing. And I felt like reading your stuff, you're not doing it because you're like genuinely saying, "Hey, I'm going to abandon Bitcoin." You're trying to prove a point that these chains are functioning and they're adding these layers of privacy, and it's a benefit, and it's not harmful. I think that's what you're trying to point out. Like, look, guys, this is out there, and if this stuff gains monetarily versus Bitcoin, then you need to explain to me. You need to resell me on Bitcoin, I guess, is I think what you're trying to do. You're trying to trigger kind of at least look into this stuff, make people dive into it a little more deeply.
Well, I think we have this church of toxic maximalism, which is making people regard Bitcoin from the wrong perspective. At the end of the day, it's software, right? It's just computer code that people run on their computers. and then they agree that certain transactions are valuable and others are not. I can agree with this. It's all an MMORPG where we're trading World of Warcraft gold, but without Blizzard in the middle. I do get that, but you have to understand that forking and running alternative clients is part of open source software. You have all sorts of flavors of Linux, and the fact that one exists and tries something which maybe is not part of the official kernel, whatever that means, is a net benefit because it's testing features which become valuable. And sometimes you find stubborn people who say, we don't need this and we don't want to add this because it's going to end up to these consequences. And that's how you legitimize the forks. So you can't really have it both ways. You can't say that Bitcoin shouldn't change because the number doesn't go up and the bankers stop buying, while also saying that forks of Bitcoin are shitcoins because they obviously deliver certain use cases which you don't have or which you no longer endorse or support or have been priced out.
Yeah.
My
Is the primary argument they would say is that um, those chains have accrued some value, but it's purely in the playing some kind of tokenomics, and the end game is for them to just buy back into Bitcoin anyway. There's not real utility there. It's all just smoke and mirrors. Is that kind of the pushback you get?
Well, it's not that nuanced, but people say, oh, of course, these shitcoiners are spending their coins when they get the chance because the plan is to exit, you know? They don't have any conviction to hold it. And that's why the number doesn't go up. But there is more to this. And of course, you can go into conspiracy theories and look into exchanges and how a lot of money goes into these altcoins, but at the same time, they're suppressed from getting pumped as heavily as Bitcoin. Of course, you can make theories about institutions not actually buying some of these altcoins. But honestly, there are users. And I think at the end of the day, it's not about the price, it's about the number of users that you can onboard. And Solana was the joke of the entire industry for a while. They were making fun of it. It was in bed with FTX and SBF and all of these people we don't hear about much anymore. But they were able to bounce back and they were able to become a threat to Ethereum. And everyone was making fun of them. They had shutdowns. They were going to Discord to find consensus and whatever. But they kept building. And it's centralized, yes. It's not the best implementation of what it can be. But at the end of the day, they have the users. And that's why they're dangerous right now for Ethereum. They're eating their cake. And Ethereum people just watch and they hope that they're going to fix it with rollups. And they're the technocrats right now. They're the ones that are trying to play conservative, while this alternative to Ethereum is actually getting more users because of meme coins and because they're not afraid to make some compromises. And to me, it's interesting that this is happening. It's the sort of situation that never happened in Bitcoin with big blocks. You had the big block hard fork, which never took off, mainly, I think, because of Craig Wright and because of some scandals that were associated with it. It never really had a chance because it was so politically compromised and it was destined to fork constantly and have conflicts and infighting, which BTC did not have. But I'm sure that if this hard fork had a much better history, it could actually pose a real threat to Bitcoin. And right now, Litecoin is, I guess, what BCH was supposed to be in terms of adoption and
Yeah,
in terms of
Charlie's the
market
first big
recognition.
block. Charlie's the first big blocker.
No, he's not.
Dude,
There's Jeff Garzik. You can go
well, I'm
back.
saying he's
I
the one
think.
that went out and made a chain that had 4 times the block space. You know what I mean? He said this is too
I don't think he
slow.
was the first one to do it, but he's the most successful one. Yes.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well,
Do you
actually,
think that?
I do. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Man.
Yeah. Do you think that the Maximus would be so toxic if the big blockchain hadn't been created, if Bitcoin Cash didn't exist? Or because I have a theory that they've painted themselves into a corner with their position And now they've got to stick to their guns. Otherwise, they'll just prove that Bitcoin Cash is superior.
No, so there is some legitimacy to that, because at one point, it was a very ugly civil war, at least socially, because there were these accounts like the RBTC Reddit thread that turned out to be supportive of BCH. And there was the @Bitcoin account on Twitter, which was supporting BCH. And there was Bitcoin.com, which was recommending people to buy BCH. So there was this response to the fact that they were trying to hijack the brand. They were trying to pretend that they're the real Bitcoin. And I think that's where it failed, because if it pretended to be its own thing and said, okay, BTC doesn't want to do this, we're going to do it, and prove to them that they were wrong about the market, they could have absorbed that market. But it seems like the users who were trying to be vengeful, or the companies that were trying to build on Bitcoin in 2016, 2017, and they gave up, they went to Ethereum. And that one ended up getting a lot of revenge traction. It wasn't BCH, it wasn't Litecoin, it was Ethereum that somehow became popular. Even if it's not ideal, it's not the best of chains, it wasn't perfect, but it was there at the right time.
Yeah, it was almost like the people that wanted to do all these creative things that required the block space, they went to the place that had the most heat, or whatever you want to call it, right? The most ability to expand with an audience, and their ability to be creative. So they just didn't, they felt, I guess, restricted, obviously, by 1 megabyte blocks. So do you, can we back up? Because actually Animal wanted to ask you this. I'm going to steal Animal's question. I kind of want to go back and ask you about, we met at the Litecoin Summit, and it was your first trip to America, from my understanding.
Oh, yeah. North America, because I've been to Argentina last year.
When we say America, in America, we mean America. USA. You're aware of this, right? You're aware that this is how
I'm aware of the James Brown song.
Yeah, living in America. Well, okay. What were your impressions? Because you had barbecue for the first time. I think you went to that fight, that Nick.
It was not
Carter
my first
fight.
Barbecue. It was maybe my first
American barbecue.
Turned brisket.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Beef brisket. I think you went to, I don't know where you went, all in all. I think we had you at that fast food place, right? Is that where you?
Yeah.
It was Kales or something.
Canes, Raising Canes.
Canes.
So, like, overall, what were your first impressions of the US? And like, did anything jump out at you, like, that surprised you? Was there anything that you were just like, wow, either the people were different than I thought, or like the landscape, or maybe it was like signs everywhere blew you away? What was it?
You have to understand that when you live in Eastern Europe, and you used to be in a communist country that was trying to establish some good relations with the US, then you grew up with American television and American films. And I had all the Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and Dolph Lundgren and Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal. I watched all of that crap when I was a child, basically.
Right.
So to me, it wasn't a culture shock in the way that people were behaving. I spent my teenage years learning about American culture. But what really surprised me was the size of the cars. Like, you guys are driving fucking tanks.
There are some. The trucks have gotten just out of control, man. We're like,
I called an Uber when I got
shoulder is at the front of the hood,
I called an Uber, and it was a Jeep Grand Cherokee, and I was thinking, why is this necessary for one person?
Oh, Cherokee, just so you know.
Cherokee. Cherokee. Okay, fine. Cherokee.
I mean, Jeeps are good in the winter. I'll tell you that. You need a 4-wheel drive. I mean, when the snow, like, at least in Canada, I'm not sure about Nashville. I think Nashville is more just a cowboy thing. But yeah, we got big roads here, and a lot of like, we need to drive everywhere, right? Like in the province I live in, we had friends that want to go see the whales and stuff, so we went and took him to this place called Tadoussac. It's within Quebec, and you know what? We drove for like 6 or 7 hours to get there. 6 or 7 hours in one direction, and we're still in the same province, right? Whereas in Europe and Romania, you're driving like I don't know how long does it take you to get from one to the other. Romania, like 3 hours tops, not even.
No, it's a large country, and we
Oh,
don't
is it?
have great roads. Yeah,
Okay.
so you can even drive 10 hours if you want to get to the other side,
Oh,
Really?
really?
like diametrically opposed point, because you have
Right.
to cross mountains. It's not very leveled. I don't know how I should describe it. It's not just a plain.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Do you
But we
want to
have
say?
pretty small cars. The sedans are king here. I do see SUVs becoming popular, but SUVs are very tiny in Nashville.
Compared to the trucks and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. I do wonder how much everything in our culture is big. Like even if you go buy a couch or something, it's like you can't even fit them in your living room anymore. You're like, well, I don't understand this. What? It's not more comfortable. It's just bigger, But anyway, so how did you get into crypto, and like what did you do before you found Bitcoin, so to speak?
I was a PhD student who wanted to write his thesis about internet privacy, which is a very interesting fact because I watched the Snowden revelations. And before that, I was able to get 100,000 signatures against something that was called ACTA. This was back in 2011, early 2012.
100,000 signatures?
Yeah, from Romanians.
Dang.
And I didn't use that later. So as soon as that cause ended, and I think that was at the peak of clicktivism, as soon as that cause ended, I never used it again. I didn't open that account. I didn't send another message to the group. I was like, okay, this reached its goal. I'm done with it. I didn't use it for political purposes, for promoting Bitcoin, for anything else. I just forgot about it because it's my way of being honest. It was created for a purpose. I could communicate with a lot of people for that purpose. But at the time, there was this initiative which was called ACTA, and it had some equivalents in the US called SOPA or PIPA,
Mhm.
PIPA. And it
Okay.
was a way to end piracy and try to impose very strict regulations against distribution of digital files and also patents, trying to enforce them in ways that even generic medicines were excluded from the market. So basically, something like aspirin could only be made by the original company, no other forks, to call it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I created a petition back in 2011. I think it was January of 2012, actually. And it had that snowball effect. And all of a sudden, I was this minor celebrity in the internet space with this crazy kid who was willing to admit that he pirated all of his software when he was growing up and could defend it by saying it was super educational. I could never get my hands on something like Windows XP, legally. It was too expensive for my parents to afford. But I could use it and I could learn. And right now I have a pretty decent job because of the fact that I could access that. So for my country, it was super beneficial.
So are you
And
like are you well known in Romania,
no,
or were you at some point?
I think I was a minor internet celebrity for a while. I did a couple of interviews. I went to a protest, which happened to be on my 20th birthday.
What?
And that I was super active in this field until I think the next summer it fell through because it was supposed to be voted in the European Commission or something, and there was too much resistance from citizens and people. Politicians like to get elected,
Mm-mm.
so they realized it's unpopular, so they gave up on it. But it was a big deal at the time, and I decided I want to write my thesis, my bachelor thesis, about something concerning the internet. And then in 2013, there was the wave of revelations coming from Edward Snowden. To me, it was the perfect storm. I watched that and I said to myself, I want to write about internet privacy. And
Hmm.
I went to my supervisor and I told him this, and he said, you're in the political science department. it's very hard for you to get aligned with what you're learning right now. We deal with elections, we deal with stuff like this. So why don't you write about online elections, which was pretty interesting, honestly. I did my research about this. I wrote a pretty decent thesis about it. And then I wanted to do something about internet privacy for my master's, but I ended up doing something about internet governance, which was a comparison of different countries and how they deal with the internet, whether or not they have censorship and stuff like this. So in a sense, it was still related, but not directly internet privacy. And then I got into Bitcoin during my PhD, and I dropped out from my PhD to focus more on Bitcoin stuff. And here I am, I guess. Like 7 or 8 years later, I'm still trying to advocate for improving Bitcoin after 6 years almost of doing my podcast and doing interviews. I'm at this point where I'm fighting with the culture which brought me and orange pilled me and whatever.
Was it?
I'd always thought you were like, I always thought you would have done something in computer science, because you're honestly probably the most technical Bitcoin, or one of the most technical Bitcoin podcasters, right? Like,
well, in high school, I did C++ coding. I wasn't very good at it, which is why I didn't pursue it in university. But if you give me a basic sequence of code, I can understand some parts of it and figure out what it does. But now with ChatGPT, you can be lazy. You can just paste it into it and ask. So I haven't refined my skill.
It's funny, and if we have time, I kind of want to circle back to the patent thing, because I just had an online little spat with somebody about patents and this libertarian idea that patents are, a state-sponsored monopoly, I guess, on an idea, and that they're ultimately detrimental to success. And I look at the world and say, since patents have existed, it's been better, but this might be an example of where maybe that's not the case. But I want to shelf that. I don't want to talk about that. If we have time at the end, we'll talk a bit about patents. But going back to your, I guess what you just said, your spat, and what you kind of started off with, I think you've come into our spaces maybe even like up to a year ago. I was familiar with your show. I think you're aware of us, but you really, I guess, gained, more prominence, or you were the lightning rod of activity on Bitcoin Twitter back in March when you dared to platform Roger Ver, the author of Hijacking Bitcoin. If you don't know who Roger Ver is, you probably just have to go find out who Roger Ver is. he was for me, when I first got into Bitcoin, a guy that I think gave that great inspirational message to what Bitcoin was intended to do. And definitely got me down the rabbit hole of like understanding how this money, how the system works today with the creation of money and the fiat system. At least sparked my curiosity and got me realizing, oh, this is something I'd never thought about. At the point I was, I don't know, 30, in my late 30s, mid to late 30s, when I first, it took me that long to ever even think about it, and I was never somebody that was not intellectual. I just hadn't even questioned that before. So he wrote a book about kind of the block size wars and his experiences from it. I didn't read the book, so I know I should, but that it essentially laid bare that there was a lot of censorship, a lot of, I guess, I don't say deplatforming, but I guess silencing, right, of shouting down of big block voices. And then ironically, you interview him, and that's the same tactic that gets used against you. Do you feel that way? Do you feel like people were trying to essentially shut down your opinion?
Well, there was a Streisand effect, I think, for a while, because people were curious to check it out. But I don't think most of them got past the first 10 minutes. And I do have this tendency to look back and see what people were doing before I got into Bitcoin. I do have a lot of respect for people like Eric Voorhees and Roger Ver, and Jeff Garzik was the developer who actually coded the SegWit 2x fork. He was one of the first people to get into Bitcoin, and also the first big blocker back in 2010. He proposed to Satoshi a version of Bitcoin that had 6 or 7 megabyte blocks. And Satoshi said, don't run this code because it's going to be out of consensus and it's a good idea to be on the same network. It's too early for this. But that was the first time someone proposed a block size increase. Indirectly, he was just messing with the code and said, what if we run this? So I do have a lot of respect for these guys. They laid the foundation. Oh, I've also had Charlie Shrem on my show last week, and that's also a big deal. That guy was the first Bitcoin martyr, the first guy to go to jail because of Bitcoin. And it was because he ran an exchange called BitInstant, and he sold some coins to someone who was going to spend them on the Silk Road. And he knew about that. He didn't care about that, but it seems like the US government disagreed with his idea that money is fungible, you know? So it is interesting that there are some guys who laid the foundations of everything and they created the narratives that people take for granted now about Bitcoin being like digital gold and whatever, but they don't get any recognition from the new generation. It seems like there's this tendency to rewrite history and create these heroes who are going to get destroyed and slain along the process and replaced by others, but in a way that does not recognize the merits. If you really want to know what's happening, you have to go back in history and talk to some of these people who have been disgraced. And to me, that's nasty because you couldn't get Bitcoin to the same point if it wasn't for Roger. He sold his Lambo to buy more Bitcoin back in 2011. He was that kind of guy. He wasn't the kind of guy who bought a Lambo with his Bitcoin gains. And he was also the first one to finance projects like Zcash and companies like blockchain.com. So back in the day when everyone was not sure if Bitcoin is going to be useful or they were reluctant to finance startups and Bitcoin, he was actually giving money to a lot of them. So from this point of view, he deserves recognition and respect. It's just that maybe he let his ego go too far in 2017, and he believed that what he was running was much bigger than the open source project Bitcoin. Maybe that he was impatient with the block size increase and did not believe in SegWit. But he did join the big block camp. He did get lied to by Craig Wright. He was deceived. He actually sued him and won in court before any of the Hodlow Knott or Peter McCormack cases. But he never really got that redemption story. So it seems like he was labeled in a certain way. And no matter what he did afterwards, he was just that guy, you know? He was a villain, no matter what he did afterwards. And I think people like Andreas Antonopoulos got some of the same treatment, and it's even worse in the case of Andreas. And people were already angry at him because he did not pick size during the block size wars. And then he co-wrote a book that's called Mastering Ethereum. And that was enough for a bunch of events and a bunch of old friends of his to basically cancel him.
No way. I was gonna ask, like, what happened to Andreas? Because he was, prior to the block size wars, he was, I think, my primary resource. Right. There was another guy, Joe D'Agostino, who's really good. I think the Bitcoin Blackboard series he made, but Andreas Antonopoulos, he had a way of explaining it that was just second to none. And it made it so
for a
you
lot
can
of people,
disagree
he
with
was the
him.
Michael Saylor, you know?
Yeah.
The guy who was telling you Bitcoin is indestructible. Bitcoin is going to get a lot of adoption because you have these Gen Z people who have no money, but they have skills and they're willing to put into it. He was also talking about kids creating their own coin and having this libertarian experiment, which at the time was popular, but the culture changed. And I think that's the issue, right? Because he was consistent in his beliefs. He came from this open source background, and then he did not adapt with the culture. He never became this toxic maximalist. So they ate him alive and they replaced him because that's what they do. There are only maybe a few slots for keynote speeches at conferences, and he was basically one of the headliners wherever he was going. So a bunch of guys made sure that he doesn't get invited anymore.
That's ridiculous because he was always the voice of reason, right? And I'm guessing that's why, because a lot of the arguments that the maxis make kind of are not, or they lack some kind of integrity, right? It's like what
I guess he also
Underground's
lost
always
some
saying.
of his passion, and he doesn't care as much. I met him last year. He was very chill.
Yeah,
He called himself retired from Bitcoin.
that's the other thing, right? So at some point, these OGs, they have Bitcoin themselves, and at some point they're like, why stick my neck out, right? Like, what do I have to gain from this? The project's succeeded as far as I'm concerned, mostly, and I don't need the trouble anymore, right?
There's a little bit, you mentioned early adopters and like Roger selling a Lambo to acquire more Bitcoin. Like that mentality has obviously led to success of Bitcoin. The hodl, this convicted buyers, right? People not convicted like going to jail, but having conviction is important early on. Like I think the monetary value it matters, right? It gets eyeballs. It grows the awareness. Yeah, it grows awareness, grows adoption, whether you want to call it buyers, and that's an important aspect. And it's a matter of when does it have to turn into not speculating anymore? And I think that's what hopefully is going to happen at some point, is that there's a recognition that you can't just live on this model forever.
No, of course not. I mean, think about the world economy, right? If you actually don't live in your mom's basement and you are actually part of the economy and you go out every day and you buy stuff and you understand the importance of taking loans and taking risk and credit and all of these elements of the financial system, you understand that there's no way a huddling economy can work.
Right.
What's going to happen? You're going to negotiate which user is going to give up on his hodl stash to fix the roads or something.
Well, in what obviously, and what is happening, and what I think you're recognizing, and the statistics show, is that people are just picking a different route. They're like, this just doesn't. If I am going to use it, this doesn't work for me. Bitcoin doesn't work for me anymore, and so they're just going around and using something else, whether it's stable coins or Solana or Litecoin. They're and that's the worst part of it, is that we've reached an upper limit of users and people are never even engaging. People are in crypto and they never engage with Bitcoin now. They've just taken themselves away as an option. And that's got to be the worst case scenario, is that you just get left behind.
Well, that's definitely a scenario that can happen. You get a lot of these. I think it started with maybe with the ICO mania, but even at the time, people were converting their Ethereum to Bitcoin. But after the NFT mania, I think Ethereum I think it was perceived as much more valuable than before. And then you also had a much higher or much easier access to stable coins. And I do think that stable coins are truly shameful for the entire industry. I mean, for the free market people who wanted to build a currency that is outside of the US dollar system, the fact that USDT is so big and everyone wants to receive USDT is a shame. It just proves that all the evangelists and everyone who was trying to promote Bitcoin or Litecoin or something else has failed to a degree, because people want that.
It's pretty ironic. Yeah, when you consider that the project that was meant to dethrone US dollar hegemony has actually enabled it.
Well,
I don't know.
the first instance of USDT was built on Bitcoin.
I feel like
there
it's
was the Omni layer for that.
I feel like it's a natural step, right? The users of these things are appreciating the utility of cross-border payments, uncensored transactions, right? And the ability to choose which money they want to use. Now, just because they haven't chosen what we consider to be, better money, sound money, I don't think that's a loss. I see this as step one. and that people are getting comfortable with the technology. And until they feel that the dollar is not giving them what they need, then they should use the money that they see as benefit for them. Like they don't want the volatility. They just want low fees and cross-border payments, and that's it. So in a libertarian ideal, they're choosing the thing that um, checks the boxes for them, right? That they as customers are getting the most benefit, because hodling doesn't make sense for people who don't have any money.
Well, I do get that savings is a luxury. But at the same time, Tether can be censored, and they do have a list of blacklisted addresses, and they do have limits in certain countries where they can only transact certain amounts in 1 day or 1 month or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not what you think it is. It's not like Litecoin or Bitcoin where you send as much as you want to anyone, and there is a censorship resistance mechanism that's gonna assure both parties involved in the transaction that there's finality for it. In
But don't you feel
Tether,
like that's the next step? Like people have to experience that. They have to go, oh, dude, my tether got shut down, or I was only allowed to send X amount, or these fees. Like I guess fees on Tron have gotten so high now. Like they'll start looking for alternatives, and at least they're comfortable with the way these things work now. Where pre-stablecoin, they weren't even engaging with blockchains at all.
well, in US, you have services like Venmo and Cash App and whatever, which I
Mm-hmm.
think work much better in terms of user experience than Tether. Tether is for underdeveloped countries and
Right.
people who actually live in very inflationary environments. And I think Tether has also been very convenient for the US government that's trying to export inflation towards other nations. The fact
Yeah.
that you have low inflation these days, compared to the expectation at least, is due to the fact that you successfully exported your inflation to other territories.
Yeah. Colonizing Web 3.0. Right?
So it's a shame from my point of view. And also, coming back to toxic Bitcoin maximalism, you have to look at their predictions, right? They say everything is going to zero against Bitcoin. They say, oh, look, the world economy is going to collapse during the pandemic. Oh, this money printing of trillions of dollars is going to spike prices proportionately. It just proves that they're clueless about how the world works and how the dynamics of supply and demand are functioning. And they're making these predictions even about silly stuff like the stock to flow price model, and they double down on it. And then you see how wrong they can be. And then you look at their predictions about stuff like Ethereum 2.0 never coming out and never becoming proof of stake. And that one actually happens. And then what's left of their predictions? And it's frustrating to watch this and realize that you're on this camp with people who are constantly making wrong predictions. And they don't seem smart. They just seem ideological. And that's pretty much it. It's more like a church than it is something scientific or a
Would you
meritocracy.
would you say they've lost some of their integrity?
It's very hard to define that because I'm not sure if they had it in the first place.
Fair enough.
You just have people who are ideological, dogmatic, or else getting paid to promote narratives. And I don't know where they started.
That's true, and I mean,
You,
especially newer Bitcoiners, they might believe it, right? So they might not. I don't want to say they might not know better because what do I know? But they might not have the context of the last 10 years, right? They just have the
I do think
context of the last
about this
4
a
years.
lot because when I was in Nashville, I went to this party by Unchained Capital. And I just went there with a bunch of guys. And I looked around and I realized that I don't fit in, you know. Everyone there looked like a banker. They were talking about yield and whatever return they made on investments, and they were older than me, like in their mid 40s, and they just had that aesthetic. Like I was thinking, what am I doing here?
Your finance bros.
I just got my free dinner and I left because I realized I'm in the wrong place. And the other extreme of the spectrum is that after this, I went to the Taproot Wizards party, and that one was just too edgy for me. It felt like I'm too old for that.
Yeah, even though Udi's like same guy is in the 45, mid 40s, that's me. But what's funny? You make me think about, do you know the movie It's a Wonderful Life, the Christmas movie?
Yeah, I
You guys
know
know
it.
what I'm talking about? So
George
there's a
Bailey.
point I've probably talked about this. Yeah, so George Bailey, when his uncle loses that money and he's desperate and he goes to Old Man Potter, and Old Man Potter's like, you know what? You're a talented guy. You need to shut down that savings and loan. I'll pay you. Like, I think he offers him he offers him like 6 times or 8 times what he's currently making. Like, to make more in a month, maybe more than that. Might have been some insane amount. And George Billy's like, I don't need to talk to my wife. I'm done. Right. I'm frustrated with my business, and he doesn't want to go to jail. And he shakes Potter's hand, and he's just instantly like, no, I can't do. Like, he gets this feeling comes over him, like, just that this is slimy, right? He knows he's doing the wrong thing, and that's what makes me think of it when you say you go to this dinner and you're just like, these aren't my people. Like, this is not the reason I'm interested in Bitcoin. This is not how the future of this is going to be successful. Is not just getting in bed with these people that clearly are winning the current system. They're just trying to exploit the system for monetary gain. There's no thought. And I've said this forever about like Saylor. I know Saylor done some educational stuff, but the money he continues to pour into buying more Bitcoin as opposed to like finding ways to get it into the hands of more people. I mean, how many billions of dollars of Bitcoin does he need? Like, at what point in time does it not? If it's going to $1 million or $10 million, then I don't understand the purpose at this point, right? So why not
World
promote
domination.
the success of it? Why not promote the success of it as opposed to just acquiring more? Because that doesn't change anything for anyone.
Oh, it pumps the price. We went from 58K to 60K within a couple of hours of his announcement that he recently bought. And that's when I basically said what is super unpopular in Bitcoin, that right now the project has become proof of stake. And I can argue it because the most recent adventure of his was that he was responsible for denying a payment to Bitcoin Core developers from one of the ETFs, which was planning to give some of the profits to developers. And he was responsible directly for getting involved to stop that from happening. And if you go back to an interview that he did back in 2020 with BTC Times, he said, forget about cypherpunk principles. I actually have that on my phone, so I can read it so I don't
Yeah, you
misquote
just
him.
tweeted it this morning, I think, right?
Yeah, it's supposed to be informative. I don't deal with speculation, I deal with facts. So he said, stop talking about regulatory arbitrage, censorship resistance, privacy, and tax evasion. They're bad ideas. We hate that. People with billions of dollars don't want to invest in crypto networks that support anarchists.
Wow.
So it's all you need to know, right? Because this was 4 years ago. And it seems like this year has been especially bad with cracking down on privacy services, shutting down the non custodial Lightning wallets. It seems like only the custodial and compliant businesses in the space are allowed to function, to operate. And it's super disappointing. Not that this happened, but the reaction that followed it. There's just not enough resistance. It seems like Bitcoin is so culturally lost that people look at the price and they say, this happened, but at the same time, last year we were at 30K and now we're at 60K. So, everything is fine because the number is going up. But they fail to see how. I also called this yesterday the great replacement, right? You have this conspiracy theory in the West that we're going to get replaced by immigrants. And
Okay.
in Bitcoin, I think there's something similar happening with the quote unquote plebs, the people who are saying, oh, I'm here for the technology, for censorship resistance. I want to fight the government and I want to run my own node on Tor and be able to receive payments in spite of all of this censorship during the pandemic. They just give up and they get replaced by people who are much more friendly to bankers, and they go on conference stages and they complain that Bitcoin doesn't have enough regulations and institutions cannot adopt it. And the most funny thing I've seen, I think, came from the Polkadot, I don't know what to call them, project ecosystem or whatever. They have this built-in voting system, and they stake their coins, and according to the size of their stake, they have a certain weight to their vote. And
Right.
some proposal was made from Chainalysis, the company. And Chainalysis basically right now is the gatekeeper for institutional partnerships. So if there's any bank that wants to use, I guess, stable coins on their blockchain or build tokens to do whatever, then they have to go to Chainalysis and they have to greenlight the whole deal and say, you know, this chain is compliant, is working according to our rules or whatever. I don't think they do much in terms of actual tooling. They just act as the big bully that extorts money from users and says, if you want to get big, you have to pay us $6 million, and then we're going to allow you to have partnerships. And it's so funny. I think the first part of the vote was negative. They tried to reject the proposal and said that there's no substantial proof that this sort of deal is going to bring the users. But they, you know, in the proposal, Chainalysis actually said that they're going to bring in more adoption and more attention that potentially is going to make the price go up. So it's scary where this is heading. And that's why I double down on privacy. I think there was never a time in the history of the internet when privacy was so obviously necessary. Before this, I think privacy was for activists, it was for people who are trying to blatantly hide from the government for whatever reason. But now there's a lot more tyranny. And morally speaking, you gotta hide from your government when it's tyrannical. And
Right.
I
Yeah,
do
you're
see
in the right. Yeah. Yeah, the government's not just because it's legal doesn't mean it's moral, right?
I do see a lot of need for privacy right now. There was the Brazil situation with Twitter.
Yep.
There is this whole situation with blockchain analysis becoming more advanced. If you go back to read Satoshi's emails, he did say something about Bitcoin being able to buy cypherpunks a few years. He does say something along the lines of this is going to be good enough for a few years until they catch up. Well, they caught up.
Yeah.
They have all the tools to track Bitcoin transactions and also Litecoin. I think Litecoin is much easier because there are fewer transactions. But with MWeb, at least you're taking a step in the right direction and you're doing something about it.
On top of
Yeah.
privacy, I mean, another component to it is censorship, right? You know, Telegram, they were, at least what I heard, the reason why they did it was because he wasn't, he was protecting people, right? Protecting criminals and terrorists by not
Allegedly, I don't know.
allegedly. But if you ask me, I think that's bogus. That's a bogus reason because, you know, real criminals, organized crime, real terrorists, they're going to use Signal. They're going to use other tools that are more suited. That
They're
are
not going to use the internet.
even, yeah, sure. What I think the real cause between Pavel Durov's arrest was that he wasn't censoring messages coming out of Russia and Ukraine. They weren't able to control the narrative. They weren't able to control the propaganda, and people were able to see what was probably the truth coming from the front lines, and other stuff. So yeah, privacy and censorship, I feel like they go hand in hand. Without privacy, you can't speak your truth. You can't speak the truth in a tyrannical environment because you'll get shut up real quick.
Yeah, there's this social aspect to privacy, but if you take it back to Bitcoin and Litecoin, you have to understand that by design, the miners can pick which transactions they're going to include in a block. So filtering and blacklisting can actually work if there's enough coordination and there's not enough decentralization of mining. So if in the absence of some sort of privacy, you can actually have these OFAC sanctioned addresses not being able to send coins. Now, I'm not advocating for some criminals being able to transact. I'm advocating for everyone being able to transact, and they already have the tooling to track, right?
Well, you were
So
saying in your pod last week that if, for example, miners, wanted to, they could block uh, coins from Satoshi's addresses, right, from being spent. Because
oh
the
yeah,
theory,
that's a funny one. Yeah.
because yeah, the theory is like if those coins ever were to move, it would cause the market to freak out and dump, right? Potentially.
It's much more than that because Bitcoin has been sold as this scarce asset, especially to bankers and these billionaires that Michael Saylor likes to present in his argumentation. So, if this narrative of the selfless founder gets destroyed, I'm pretty sure that another narrative of the computer hacker who got access to Satoshi's coins is gonna be presented, and then there's gonna be an initiative to hard fork and restore to the previous state where Satoshi's coins were not moving. And maybe that it's the real Satoshi moving his coins, but he cannot do that specifically because everyone is so greedy and they say this guy never sold. The narrative is that he's never selling and he is this benevolent person who doesn't want to benefit from his own work. But I'm pretty sure that if Satoshi is around, he's smart enough to not engage or maybe spend coins from some of the older blocks that he mined in 2010 or something, so that there's some deniability as there are more users.
Yeah, I felt like, kind of backing up a little bit on the privacy thing and, this, I guess, bowing to the institutions mentality. What's when weird is Bitcoin has all the monetary and social capital to really tell those institutions to F off. Like Monero has kind of embraced that. They're like, you know what? We don't need exchanges. It doesn't matter. There's, people are going to find a way to use this because there's utility here. And I've been surprised how, I don't want to say they're afraid, but how compliant Bitcoiners have been in hopes of like these minor gains. It's like, what are you winning here? You're personally going to enrich yourself by 20%, 50%, but you've got $3,000 into it. It's not like this isn't winning the lottery. Right. And
Oh,
so
it's
you
also funny
represent the
because
whole class.
for many years I've been to Bitcoin conferences and I did see that people like to spend with their credit cards because they say, I don't want to be the next Laszlo guy to have my pizza moment. And
Right.
they think that in the year of 2022 or 2023, they're going to have the same situation as someone had in 2010 when
Right.
Bitcoin was worth just a few cents. And they think it's going to go up so much, it's going to absorb the entire monetary activity of the world. And all the world's money is going to get denominated into Bitcoin. And even one Satoshi is going to be worth more than $1. I think that's what they think is going to happen. But the question is how? If you don't scale and you don't have proper privacy, why would anyone want to use it? And as long as there's an alternative that does fulfill some use cases, why would anyone switch to Bitcoin just because they realize that they can have this monetary pump, they can get richer? Well, maybe they just need to spend it. So if you don't have this activity on Bitcoin, why would anyone want to save in it?
Kind of
I
chicken
don't
the
know.
egg type of question, right? Like,
Yeah. Right.
It's a chicken and egg problem, I think, but you need
do you
to have
think
both.
do you think that's a possibility? Do you believe that everything divided by 21 million is possible?
No, that's silly.
Mhm.
Because even if you have a Bitcoin only standard and a Bitcoin only world, you can have governments issuing their own currencies on Bitcoin. So they're going to create tokens. There's already the infrastructure for that. There's Omni, there's Counterparty. They issue their own tokens and they say, give me your 1 Bitcoin for these 10 bonds of mine. And I promise you that we're going to build this or we're going to go to where we're going to conquer our neighbor. And then I'm going to give you double.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no way to put an end to the fiat situation because you can always print more money. Money
people
is just
people
the
always want to.
language that people use for transmitting value. And if there's someone in a position of authority giving you something in exchange for something that you have, there's always an endpoint. There's always a weak link that's gonna legitimize this. And I don't think we're gonna end wars and have all of this beautiful situation. Maybe we're gonna make them more expensive. And maybe we're gonna empower ourselves to have a stronger opinion on what the government is doing. So they're not going to be able to do whatever they want. They're going to have to ask us much more often. But I don't see this as the revolution where we're going to live in citadels outside of the world and have this utopian society where everything magically works and deny the existence of human history and human nature and say just because we have better money now, we're going to forget about all of the other human problems.
Yeah, well, I mean, the
I mean,
nature of money is to exchange it. So, like, if you're exchanging money, you're acknowledging that something else has more value than the money you're holding. Like, if I want to buy a house, I'm saying I value the house more than I value my money. So, there's no way to say that the money will outstrip the value of, like, it doesn't make any sense at all. Like, there's utility. You have to have real use for the things that you consume. It's just, you can't, like, you own a factory, your Bitcoin can't produce product for you. So you need to go find things that produce more value than the money you're holding in your wallet. And if you have a world where sitting on the money is going to produce more value, it doesn't produce. I mean, I feel like the Peter Schiff when I say this. It doesn't make anything. It doesn't make anything real in the real world that people use and need in their daily lives. What it does produce is a free market of money, like a counter trade to the dollar. And it gives you utility of private transactions, right? Borderless transactions, this unusual governance model, going back to what you were talking about, Vlad. But yeah, to think that people are going to choose to just hold it instead of eating is insane.
I think if you look at like Argentina, right, you have this company that was in or is in a full blown state of collapse, where they have, I want to say, an opportunity, but I don't know if it's like an opportunity. They have the necessity to like uproot everything, every government department, and recreate it, right, with modern technology potentially. There's an opportunity to make things extremely efficient, right, to reduce the redundancies within the government that are inherent to government, I guess, over time, ever growing state. Because I think of, I'm really into sci-fi, right? And if you look at Star Trek, they have basically they've evolved, or their society has progressed to what is it, a post-scarcity world, right? Where they don't have a want for anything. They have these matter compilers, these what are they called? Little microwaves, or able to create whatever they want out of them, food, toys. You know what I mean? They don't need the money, but they still pursue, I guess. Well, they still have academic pursuits. They still want to explore space and whatnot. I think we are going to get there eventually. I think Bitcoin will help us get there. But I do believe that there will be a point where even Bitcoin won't be needed. Where like keeping score is no longer going to be relevant. Maybe that's 50 years from now. Maybe it's 100 years from now. Maybe sooner. But I mean, until then, I definitely think that Bitcoin and things like it are gonna play a role in making us, or they can play a role in making society, different governments more efficient.
I
Reducing.
think about this a lot because you have two versions of the future. You're going to have a future where Bitcoin actually scales and becomes private and is the world's only form of money, which, once again, I doubt is ever going to happen, but it can be even bigger than gold. Or you have a future where you're going to have 21 million Bitcoins that get swapped for 100 million Moneros and 84 million Litecoins and maybe 100 million Zcashes and maybe some 100 million Ethers.
There's only like
So
19 million Monero, just so you know.
I don't know. I'm just saying. So maybe you're going to have that kind of future where You're going to have multiple networks with different benefits, and you get to swap in a way that's accessible for everyone between the networks so that you get the advantages that you want. You're not going to have everything divided by 21 million, but you're going to have everything divided by maybe 300 million. But that's still a net benefit. That's still disinflationary, that's still predictable. There's this distinction to be made between scarce and limited in supply. Because gold is scarce, but it's not limited in supply. You don't know how much of it there is, but you know that it's
Mhm.
hard to find. So that's what gives it some value on markets.
Right.
And I think Bitcoin gives us a good way to measure it. But at the same time, I do see a movement of people trying to argue that there's no way this mining schedule situation is going to work in the way that Satoshi expected. And in 10 years, they think it's a good idea to turn on some sort of tail emission because they don't believe users are willing to pay fees high enough to keep the miners going. And I do like the idea of these pegged sidechains. I do like Pole stored stripe chains because they address the concerns directly with some trade offs. But they do pay the miners, they do scale the network, and they do provide more functionality that can bring more developers and potentially more users. So
I'm
I
glad
do like this.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's where it sounded like, you were describing, right? Is that if you truly want scalability and you feel like 21 million is the most important number in the world, then your best option is something like drive chains because at least you avoid any fractional reserve banking, you avoid custodians. I mean, we had Paul on a few weeks ago, and I'm overall supportive of it until somebody tells me some sort of like, you know, gloom and doom that this is going to destroy Litecoin. Um, I say it's important that we have as many users as possible able to use these things. I've even gone on saying like if Litecoin blocks get full for an extended period of time and fees start to balloon, until we find a good alternative, block increases should be the answer in the short term, right? Maybe it's not the long term answer, but I mean, I guess going on to drive chains? Do you feel this is if you can't even get opcat added, do you feel like this is just impossible at this point? Have you lost faith in the development process of Bitcoin? That's maybe my short question.
Partially, but at the same time, what's happening right now with the miners is interesting, as you have these large companies from the US that, on one hand, they're losing money right now. They're not running at a profitable threshold because they're
Mm-hmm.
not earning too much from fees. And the price didn't really go up according to expectations. I guess everyone after the ETFs, they were hoping for 100K at least. So they bought a lot of ASICs. They're still running them, but they're not making any profits. And I think with this administration, they also get taxed too much. And the only way in which they can still be profitable is to move somewhere else. And I don't think they want to move somewhere else. So I think in the next year or two, we're going to see the miners, unless there's a massive price increase, like 2 or 3x for Bitcoin, we're going to see miners become more vocal about their needs because so far they have been very nice and obedient and cooperative and saying, we're fine, we're making profits. But after this halving, it's become more brutal for them. And they do realize that this cannot go on forever.
They have more
So,
weight to push around too now. They've got more influence. They've got more money.
and I think mining is more decentralized than it was 7 years ago, when you could rightfully argue that much of it is happening in China. And some of the same companies that manufacture the ASIC miners are taking advantage from them. Now it's a lot more decentralized.
Mm-hmm.
Some will
How
argue that
expensive?
it's not decentralized enough. And it's funny because you get developers saying that Foundry, which is the largest mining pool right now, is an existential threat to Bitcoin because it's backed by an American company and there are no outside participants. It's not a pool in the sense that you have different users who are joining to mine with them. It's just one monolithic company that's doing everything.
Solo mining.
It's essentially solo mining, yeah.
So because here's something that we talked about this, because that marathon, I think it was like their board of directors, and the guy who is the head of their board of directors said something along the lines of, Bitcoin mining is a matter of national security, which as soon as those words came out, I'm going, okay, they're eventually going to be looking for some reason to
Bailout.
justify state involvement. Yeah. Yep, exactly. Subsidizing, protecting maybe cutting their costs, giving them cheap access to electricity, but essentially putting them in a position that they'll outcompete someone who doesn't have access to the federal government, right? So in exchange, the federal government's not going to do this just for fun, right? They're going to expect something out of it, which is likely censorship. And almost to the point of, I imagine they'll maybe only mine blocks from certain entities. It could even get to that point, right? What I don't understand from a technical perspective, and you can tell me, what is the obsession with number go up in hash rate? Because it ultimately doesn't really, the number itself doesn't change a whole lot, right?
No, especially in an environment where you have mining pools, it doesn't change too much. But it does prove that there are more of these devices that go online. So I think
Ooh, I could
the hash
show you
rate
some math that maybe that's not true.
the hash rate is an indicator of faith in the network's success, I think.
But hash rate's gone up a lot because of the machines are more efficient than they were. It doesn't mean more unique individuals are necessarily mining. It's
Yeah,
just the
but
machines
it also
themselves are
means
like
that
100 times more powerful than they were 8 years ago.
the miners believe in the network enough to upgrade their gears and stay
Fair.
competitive.
What do you
It proves that there's genuine interest. There's demand for becoming more efficient, for buying the latest ASICs, for running them. Because if they got cold feet about Bitcoin, they would just switch off and sell off all of their ASICs to another company, and we would have these drops in hash rate for a few weeks. But we haven't really experienced that. Even when China supposedly kicked out most of the miners and the companies moved to other countries, we still didn't have that dramatic drop that everyone expected.
But I mean, we did see was it 20% drop around that time for like a
Yeah, it
month
was
or so?
3 years ago.
Yeah, it was for about a month or two before they moved to, I don't know, Kazakhstan or something, right? Like, where again, like I think they were mining with coal. Uh, I'm just curious because I have some friends that are critical, really critical of Bitcoin, anything proof of work. They're huge Solana and Ethereum fans. Um, I'm just curious what you say to the critics saying that proof of work is just an environmental catastrophe. It's bad for the environment. That it's, you know, there's no point. Like, what's the point of proof of work when you have proof of stake?
Oh, so is their existence. But I digress. My point right now is that proof of work is the only fair way to distribute the coins, at least initially. It's the only way in which you have some actual cost to the generation of coins. If you want the currency to get produced, you don't just print it out of thin air with no cost and then make some scheme and distribute it to early investors and to devs and then sell it to retail. And the only way to acquire coins within a proof of stake environment is to buy them from someone. But in the case of proof of work, you can actually earn them by participating in the system. Of course, it's not economical always, it's not the best way, but it's an alternative that you have. If you don't want to pump someone's bags by purchasing the currency, you're just mining. You're investing in hardware and you're using electricity for the purpose of securing the network, so you're also contributing to it, and you receive a reward randomly or by virtue of your chances, according to how much hash rate you have. So there is no fairer way to distribute the currency. If it's proof of stake, it just means that it's centralized. And there is no way for a proof of stake system, especially if it starts out of as proof of stake, to remain decentralized.
I mean,
So like
Ethereum almost
Monero,
had it, right? Like, but the problem with Ethereum, I guess, is that there was a huge pre-mine, and Vitalik still owns a ton of it.
No, I think that's exactly why they could trust in proof of stake that it could stay secure and not be outvoted. Because this is another attack vector in proof of stake. In proof of work, you cannot print more ASICs, right? They require some very specific materials and some knowledge on
some
how to
people
build them.
can't print them. Some people can create them.
Okay, but you run out of resources at one point.
Yeah,
But in
fair
proof
enough.
of stake, you just print money. You print money, you buy your stake in that network, and that's it. You can vote to do whatever you want. And it doesn't even have to be obvious. You can do it over time. You can do it from multiple entities, and then you rig the system.
Do you think like someone like Monero, who's gotten to their tail emission, the initial distribution is done, that a migration to proof of stake is worth considering?
No, because Monero has been very protective of the ability to mine with your CPU. Every time there was an ASIC made for Monero, they would hard fork into something that allowed you to mine with your CPU. And they're very adamant about it because they do want anyone around the world to be able to get their own coins privately and then send them to whoever they want.
Okay.
That's an important aspect of what Monero is by design. And I do admire them because even though they do have a degree of trust in developers and development in general, they do understand what the purpose of the project is. So they don't spread in multiple directions and try to test the market for something else like NFTs or whatever. They know that their purpose is just to fulfill this use case. So they optimize for it, which is beautiful. In the case of Bitcoin, you always have people fighting saying, it's also this, it's not just that. It's not just a money system, it's also a way for me to put tokens on it. It's also a way to build digital identity on it. It's also a way for me to express myself without return messages that I put just like Satoshi and stuff like this. In the case of Monero, there is no ambiguity about what it is. Everyone knows what it is and how you can use it, and they optimize around that use case. So I do admire them for this.
Yeah, I was really against Ethereum when they were doing the GPU mining and stuff. I thought, especially because I'm a gamer, and it made it pretty hard for a couple of years to get your hands on a decent GPU at a reasonable price. So when they went to proof of stake, I was pretty happy. Monero, like I had thought about it the same way for a little bit, thinking like, why not just use ASICs? Why not not create a supply shock for AMD CPUs? But ultimately, I feel like there's less of a supply shock. AMD CPUs are still competitively priced. Sorry, shut up.
I like you think
my
your
cat
cat
thinks I'm talking to
understands.
her. I'm not. But yeah, no, and like I agree. Like I enjoy. I don't have any Monero. I think it's a cool project, but I can't.
Nobody has any Monero.
Right, sure. But I also feel like it's just I do like the script ecosystem, and I feel like it's ultimately going to be more successful.
Well, this is a little bit because I know you want to tap into the script. I'm going to cut you off real quick because
Sure.
I think when you talk about miners looking for, I think they're looking for ways to make new revenue, and this new, maybe you can explain what this fractal Bitcoin is. But Animal, I think, was going to go into script and what.
No, I just
like.
I just want to say that like to start a financial revolution, right? Which is what I think we're all trying to do here, right? Trying to debank everyone, I guess. You can't really
Unbank
do
the
that.
bank.
Yeah, whatever. Like unbank people.
Unbank the banked. That's what we should. That should be our new slogan. Instead of bank the unbanked, it's unbank the banked.
It's just what I want to say is it's hard to start a financial revolution from the shadows, right? And especially if you know if everyone's who's a Monero, you know, everyone who has Monero never admits to it, like how you going to gain traction, right? So yeah. Anyways, yeah.
I think this is their time to shine. There was never another time in history that demanded so much privacy for the average internet user. There was never another moment when you were so surveilled by corporations and governments and all the people you don't want to have your data. So I do think that in some ways these privacy coins were ahead of their time when they got launched. They were made by these activists who were concerned about stuff that was not really happening, but now it's really happening. All of the concerns that they had are real right now. You could see you're from Canada. I'm not sure how close you are to the protests that happened 2 years ago in
The
Ottawa.
truckers.
Yeah, the truckers. But they did have
Yeah.
this initiative to give them Bitcoin, and I did hear that it was pretty much a failure in the sense
Everyone's
that the
Coinbase accounts
distribution.
everyone's Coinbase accounts got canceled or whatever. They had a Kickstarter, like what was the Bitcoin equivalent of a Kickstarter that, you know, basically everyone got doxxed. Everyone that donated was doxxed and debanked, unwillfully.
Because they did it, and they also
yeah.
did it in the wrong way, because they told those guys, yeah, go open a Coinbase account, rather than, hey, sponsor of our show, Cake Wallet, go download a mobile wallet like Cake Wallet, and you can receive without having to go through a third party. I mean, that's the whole purpose, right? And even beyond that, using something on there like MWeb, which we can talk about, or VPM as we're trying to call it, right? That you can post an address and no one can see what's in your wallet. No one can track what you do with it after the fact. Like those were the critical elements they missed. They just, again, and this is a little bit like the information void that's been created, is that everyone's just told, oh, this is perfect, uncensorable money. You can't F with it. You can account for it. And it's like, yeah, if you use it in a particular way. But if if you're using Strike, you can't send it to certain parts of the world, right? If you're using Coinbase, they can cut Alex Jones out, or they can take your money and freeze it if the state tells them to do that, because you're in some sort of litigation. Like that's not uneffable money. And that's probably the worst part of, I think, I made a post about this recently about why I am hard on Bitcoiners. Granted, because I'm a Litecoiner and they have never been really nice to us, at least not in the last 4 or 5 years. And it's the misrepresentation of reality, I think, is what's so it's detrimental to the space, because people come in, they're lied to, and they go, oh, this is all just bullshit. Like that, you know, it didn't hit $100,000 4 years ago. Why would I believe it's going to happen again? Right. It's just, it's been a bad look for the entire space. And I don't know. I feel like the speculative nature of it has to be kind of killed before we can move on. You know, Lightning Network has been pretty effectively debunked as far as a viable long-term solution. You may not agree with me, Vlad, but for the most part, in its current state, no one is a believer that this is going to be what they were told. And so we're still see people pump it. They still won't let it die, but it's pretty much dying among people who understand what's going on. And I think the same will come true for the price speculation. Eventually people go, you know what? That can't be the only message we deliver. That can't be the sales trick, because it's not coming true.
Well, yeah, about the Lightning Network, it was actually Litecoin that used that first on the mainnet. And
Hey, don't blame us for your problems.
There's no redemption arc for Litecoin within the toxic maximalist community. People overlook these facts and they say, no, it's not true. You're lying, blah, 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 even though it happened. And it's very sad right now, because I remember we did this panel 2 months ago in Nashville about the Lightning Network. And since then, you had 2 major events which actually happened this week. There was Nayuta or something, Nayuta. It's a Japanese Lightning client. They were the 4th large team working on Lightning. The biggest one was or it is Lightning Labs. The other one is Blockstream with C Lightning, which they rebranded as Core Lightning. And then there is Phoenix, and their implementation is Eclair. So these three big ones got competition from another one from Japan that was trying to put Lightning Network on a Raspberry Pi Zero. So basically optimized for very low powered devices, also working on mobile wallets and phones. They have a pretty good mobile wallet, and they're shutting down their operations because they realize that the future of Lightning is custodial, and also the CEO says he has some health problems. So that might also be part of the reason. But one of the large four companies, and there are actually five right now because there's also Jack Dorsey's toy with LDK, Lightning Development Kit.
Mm-hmm.
So one of these five got shut down, and it was also the weakest and the one that had the lowest amount of adoption. But it was an ambitious one, which did not want to compromise with custodianship.
Mm.
And in the message that they posted, as a way of saying goodbye, they said that they observed how Lightning is evolving past their goal of maintaining sovereignty and self-custody without compromise. And right now, custodial solutions are the one that actually have market success within the Lightning ecosystem. So it's sad. To me, this is a major failure for the Lightning Network. And I was thinking before this interview, actually, that I was able to see the entire cycle, the entire arc of Lightning from the beginning, how it was presented, that it's this solution to scale Bitcoin. It's not a solution, it's the solution. The only one solution that can actually scale a blockchain. And in the beginning, when Litecoin was involved, and there was some interest from the Monero side, they were trying to present this as a highway, right? Something where you put your coins and then you do atomic swaps, and it's going to make exchanges obsolete. It's going to enable this peer to peer economy to flourish. Then they dropped this whole angle and they decided it's Bitcoin only and it's Bitcoin only technology. And they got the early evangelists and they got the enthusiastic users like myself who were very excited to try new stuff and try UXs, and then they got more developers. They raised a lot of funding. I remember like 2 or 3 years ago, there was this guy, Brad Mills, and he is one of the biggest VCs in Lightning. That he was confused that when he received a payment that exceeded the capacity of his channels, he actually received part of the payment because part of the money went into opening the channel, and he was confused about why that happens. Well, that's the architecture of Lightning. If someone is sending you more money than you actually have in liquidity, then he's going to open a channel and you're going to receive less money. And there are all of these moments when people realize that it's not really what it was advertised as, and the goalposts have moved constantly. It was supposed to be this new technology that enables seamless payments and easy UX and faster than Visa, and it's going to make all the altcoins obsolete when in fact it just helped Litecoin indirectly because people realize that it's not reliable. And of course, it's not reliable because the topography of this network relies on nodes being online all the time. And it's unrealistic to assume that users are going to be able to maintain these routing nodes and keep them at full capacity, especially since they don't want to get doxxed for running nodes and they put them on top of Tor. So you're going to have slow payments, you're going to have a lot of failed payments. And then I think like 2 or 3 years ago, the narrative changed and they said, it's nice that we tried to decentralize the network with these small home nodes, but it's time to get serious and only use professional infrastructure. So we're going to use LSPs, which stands for Lightning Service Providers, that allow you to open your own channels with them. And in exchange, you're giving up on this important feature of sovereignty, which is running your own hardware. And I did switch to Phoenix and Breeze and Blix and all of these cool kid wallets that actually work pretty well. They have a much lower failure rate. But ironically, especially today, you realize that the on chain fee for paying an on chain transaction with Bitcoin is lower than what you pay with Phoenix Wallet, which is going to charge you like $1 or $2 for one
I
transaction.
don't even understand
No
that.
kidding. And they're basically an LSP.
And you know what's even crazier? None of these businesses is profitable.
Yeah.
They're not
Yeah.
making the returns that everyone expected because Lightning is still small. It was never larger than 6,000 Bitcoin in terms of liquidity. It was just a bunch of enthusiastic adopters sending money between each other. And it got progressively smaller, and the number of companies working on it is also diminishing. And I think there was this reveal by a guy named Antoine Riard. I spoke with him briefly and I invited him on my podcast, and he said he doesn't want to get the publicity for being the guy who destroyed the Lightning narrative. And he's actually looking for a fix for the stuff that he discovered. And he doesn't want to go public about it until he finds the fix. But the point is that Lightning has moved from being this grassroots movement with people running nodes to being centralized around infrastructure with LSPs to just giving up and saying, custodial wallets are fine. Just use wallet of Satoshi. And even that one fails. Like if you go to a store and you have your card, I don't have a card here. I just have this Pepe with Charlie that my girlfriend drew. Let's say that this is my card, and you tap this against the payment terminal, and you wait 10 seconds and you see that the payment failed. And then you use it again, maybe in a week, and it fails again. Are you going to use that payment system? You're going to feel embarrassed looking at all the people waiting in line behind you, and you're going to say, I'm just going to use something that works 100% of the time.
Right.
That's like a Bolt card you're talking about, right?
Bolt cards or pretty much anything Lightning. It doesn't matter if it's a card or if you scan a QR and you send. It is a bit embarrassing to wait for that confirmation. I mean, it's nice, it's cypherpunk, but I think it was misadvertised and misused in terms of what it can be. And right now, there's this whole movement of people building eCash on top of custodial Lightning. And they say, look, maybe that we were not able to do this in a decentralized way. Maybe that this custodian can censor you. But at the same time, how about we give you some privacy so that the custodian doesn't know it's actually you who's sending the transactions? Which is fine, I guess. It's fine for its use case, but it's not the scaling solution. It's not.
Are you talking about Cashew?
Cashew, and there's the other one that's called Fediment. Fediment is trying to establish federations of Pcash, and that's gonna, in my opinion, that's gonna lead to a lot of rug pulls with people stealing Bitcoin.
You made me think about when you talked about, there's fees on Lightning, and it made me think like the old phrase that your grandparents might say, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Somebody's going to have to pay this fee at some point. And that's always been my beef with Lightning is like, why do I, as the merchant, now I have to go pay the fee because you want to pay me in Bitcoin? So it's a penalty to me. That's kind of one of the benefits of me as a merchant. I don't have to pay a fee. But if I want to take my Lightning Bitcoin and move it on chain, then I'm paying the fee. Doesn't seem fair. So yeah, you're going to pay it through fees or inflation. If you want to secure the network, there's got to be, that fee has to be paid. And I feel like it's a very like communist utopia belief system that someone else is going to pay for it. Like that's what all this stuff seems to be. I like the security, but I don't want to pay for it. So go figure some way out that I don't have to pay for the fee. And that's what they're sacrificing everything for, just because they don't want to pay fees. That's really the end of the day. If you love the network so much, pay the fee.
At the peak of the Lightning success, there was this guy. I remember his face. Rene Picard, that's his name.
Mm-hmm.
So Rene Picard was trying to create this initiative that's called through zero routing, which means he was setting the default fee to zero, and he was convincing a bunch of other people to do the same, to basically take a lot of the economic activity. When people are looking to send cheap payments, they're basically gonna go through these nodes. And he was thinking about it in terms of, this communist utopia. And of course, it never worked. Of course, it's not around anymore because nobody wants to run their server 24/7 and pay maybe $100 every month to keep it online and then make no money off of it. That's not really how it works. As much as there is some kindness and benevolence in this world, you can't expect everyone to do this. But I think also Lightning was misadvertised because for what it is, it could be used as this payment channel system where instead of sending 10 transactions, let's say someone gets hired for a year or something to work for a company, and the company is going to pay the monthly salary to that employee. Maybe they can open a channel, and instead of having 12 payments, one every month, they're going to have this Lightning channel that they open between each other, and then they finally settle, and that's the end of it. So that could be a way to use it. But it was not advertised for its payment channel capacity, which implies that you're going to return to the base layer. It's still being advertised by some developers as the way to get off the blockchain and never touch it.
Mm-hmm.
And that can only work in a custodial environment, unfortunately,
Yeah.
at least so far.
Do you think? Because when we were in Nashville, some of us were talking about the possibility of perhaps using MWeb and Lightning, or putting Lightning on the extension block, on the MWeb extension block. How many of those problems do you think that would solve? You know, the privacy issue, liquidity management, the hub and spoke, or I guess the issues with having a hub and spoke topology kind of almost go away if you have perfect anonymity. Do you think that would ultimately, or could ultimately be, I guess, Lightning's final form?
I guess, but it's a matter of survival, I think, at this point. The question is for how long is Lightning going to be around and going to be presented as this revolutionary scaling technology? Because maybe something like rollups is going to become much more popular. ZK rollups right now are huge in Ethereum. There's a lot of money going into them. There are a bunch of teams in Bitcoin trying to bring that to Bitcoin. And so far, they were not able to do it in a trust minimized way, or just not good enough. But with stuff like BitVM, and that's something that gives me some hope in Bitcoin, the existence of these projects and protocols that get built by some guy, and he's just trying to create something for their own use case, and then people figure out something else that they can do with it, just like ordinals, right? That one was such a disruptive invention because it came out of nowhere. It tapped into an existing market. It was built without permission from anyone. And I think it was very powerful. And then people figured out that they can put much more than JPEGs in Bitcoin blocks. They can also put zero knowledge proofs that they can use for verifying certain stuff. So I think that's huge. It was something that's truly cypherpunk and something that I wish I would see more of, and something that I have on my podcast. And that's why I still think that Bitcoin can succeed. But it just seems that the adversary is so powerful and controls the narrative. And I'm also disappointed when I see in Litecoin that some people say, oh, maybe that we should get an ETF, maybe that Grayscale should buy more of these coins, maybe that we should have more institutional adoption. How does that solve any of the problem, or any of the problems that Litecoin has? Because the purpose of Litecoin is to be the currency for payments. And if you're gonna get the same sort of speculative adoption that happened in Bitcoin, maybe that Litecoin scale is better and people are gonna be able to transact it for lower costs. But still, it doesn't increase adoption. And do you honestly think that more people will get into Litecoin if there's an ETF?
Probably
More
less
people
people
will
will get
buy
into it.
into it. They'll invest, but they won't use it. Yeah.
No, just
I think the
perpetrates a hub and
challenge for
spoke model.
Litecoin is to get more users.
Yeah.
And so far, it's been pretty successful, at least in the US. And I do see here in Europe that Litecoin is an option on pretty much every exchange or ATM. With few exceptions. There are the ones that say they're Bitcoin only, but aside from these, Litecoin is everywhere.
They probably have to manually disable Litecoin, right? Because it's probably enabled by default on their Bitcoin ATMs.
Yeah, Bitcoin. I say it all the time because this happens over and over. These businesses go out of business that are Bitcoin only. It's a death sentence, and you can't survive. You're not going to be able to compete with somebody who's able to operate with 10 different chains because humans are humans and they don't want to restrict themselves. Like that's one of the biggest weaknesses of Light Wallet. I think it's a great wallet, but it's one asset. So it's just limiting. And if you want to use other chains for whatever reason, it's easier just to use something like Cake Wallet where you've got them all in the same place. So yeah, just that siloed world just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. You don't go to a restaurant and they serve you one dish. They don't have a store that has one product. It just doesn't. Different strokes for different folks. You know what I'm saying? But we're already an hour and a half. Animal and I like to talk. It's one of our strengths, but also one of our weaknesses. And I have it more than him probably. But I do want to talk a little bit about back into. I want to talk a little more into drive chains because I do think this is something that we got hot and heavy on here when we had Paul on and we talked about it. It was debated as Litecoin community. What would be your concerns? Because I think as a person that has probably done the deep dive much more than me into the technical aspect of this, I see it as a very free market option in that the miners are going to need ways to attract users, like you've said.
Mm-hmm.
Fees are important. I do have a concern about if you're essentially infinitely growing block space by adding all these drive chains, fees will stay incredibly low to the point that it may actually be detrimental. Although the miners get to control who comes in and who doesn't, right? So, yeah, I mean, to me, do you think there's risk involved in these drive chains not being what they're sold as, being, I don't say rugged, but essentially becoming more of a pain in the ass than the user expected, and it's a negative look on the main chain? And is it better to just avoid the whole thing altogether? I guess give me the good, the bad, and the ugly of drive chains here. I'm pretty sold, but I don't know the technicals.
I think the good and the most important benefit for Bitcoin and Litecoin is not the increase in capacity, but it's the fact that you can get every use case integrated as a sidechain.
Okay.
And I did read, I forget the name of the creator of MWeb, and now I'm gonna get slaughtered for this. David Burkett. He did write that when you have something that's general purpose and you make assumptions, you're not really optimizing for anything. So you're just assuming that Ethereum developers are going to want to build on Litecoin, but you're building for something that you don't know if it's going to take off. And I do get that point, but I do see some developers who will want to use this because Ethereum has very high fees, and maybe that L2s are not very convenient. And to some degree, a drive chain of with Ethereum features is gonna basically be more decentralized than the average L2, where there are some keys that were generated by the creators of the L2, and basically the L2 creators can rug everyone. With drive chains, it's more nuanced because you deal with hash power. You don't deal with politics or a company. So I think this is the most interesting use case, but the criticism is that you're not sure if the users will come or that the builders will come. You're opening up the gates for something and you're saying we can do this now, but you're not sure if that will ever be the case.
Are we ready for it? Right? Is the world ready for drive chains? Ultimately,
I think it is, but you just have to advertise it properly and have a user base of people who are demanding this and they want to use this. If you're just shooting in the dark, maybe it's not the right moment or something.
Yeah, the
Oh,
use case
by the way,
was
the
clear.
pseudonym is Tom Elvis Judasaur, creator of
Oh.
Mimblewimble.
He
Can
was
you
talking
say
about
again?
David Burkett. He was talking about David Burkett, though.
Oh, you're talking about David Burkett? Okay, I was talking
Yeah.
about the creator of Mimblewimble is Tom Elvis Judasaur.
Yeah, that's the French name of Lord Voldemort.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
this
never
is
read
why
Harry
we talk-
Potter. I never even seen a movie, so. But yeah.
This is why we decided, and you didn't like it, Vlad, but we're as a community, we're rallying behind VPM because it's a way more understandable for the general masses than talking about a Harry Potter spell.
I don't know. I like MWeb. And
Well,
I
you
do
could-
think
you-
that a
it's a
lot of
software.
people
You have
my
every
age
right.
have read Harry Potter.
You can still call it that. This is just a soft fork. You can still use your own terminology. I remember when we started talking about this, and we were like, no, it's got to be MWeb. It's like, listen, guys, nothing is changing. We're just changing what we call it. There's nothing. It's not like we're throwing MWeb out and replacing it with something else. So
it's an
we'll
easier
see.
brand to sell, I think. Like,
Yeah.
who was it? Was it Robbie was saying? Is like, imagine you're at a bar talking to a girl, explaining to her MWeb and where the origin of the name is Mimblewimble and all that stuff. You'll see her being really unimpressed really quickly. Whereas like a VPN, I mean, she probably already knows what VPN is, and VPN is just one small leap.
Yeah, but
to
MWeb
understanding.
is just like NFT, right? What's an NFT? A non-fungible token. What the hell is that? What's fungibility? What does non-fungible mean? What's a token? But it's still caught on, right?
Yeah, and I feel like people still don't understand fungibility. I hear a lot of Bitcoiners, maybe not all of them are the best ones, but talking about how Bitcoin's fungible. Dude, no, it's not.
You just reminded me of my favorite Bitcoiner, Guacamole Zucchini. I'm gonna call him this. But
I love that you call
he
him that.
argued for a long time that blockchain analysis is just social, and at the protocol level, Bitcoin is fungible, and it's just humans who agree that certain Bitcoins can be censored, and therefore humans who are for censorship are against Bitcoin. Anyway, he has this theory, and then he got on some exchange and he sent some Bitcoins that were coin joined, and they were blocked. And he was asking for a refund, and they said that's not how it works. We're gonna ask you to give us more information about what you're doing and where the coins come from and stuff like this. And he said, no, I refuse to work with you. You are infringing on the principles of the Bitcoin network. And I'm like, this company to which you applied for a service does not deal with the Bitcoin network, They have a jurisdiction, they're from the real world. You have to mitigate the conflict between these two situations. And of course, they want to stay in business. They're not going to make you a huge favor by breaking the law just so you can get your Bitcoin back without complying. So the moment you send the Bitcoins, you consent it to their terms of use. But he's denying that. He's saying, oh, you're infringing on the principles of Bitcoin. And he made a big deal out of it. And he made himself look like this guy who's fighting for fungibility. But in reality, he just proved that he's a major idiot who has no idea what he's doing. And he's preaching to something or for something that is not practical. It's not how it works.
Yeah.
There's also the other side. There's John Carvalho, who is a big Bitcoin maximalist, and his idea of fungibility is just being able to withdraw from one exchange and get into the other without any issues. And he's anti-privacy for Bitcoin. He says it's just, or not anti-privacy, but anti-coin join. He says it's just not good enough.
He was the one that was on your show, and he was like saying how nobody cares about Litecoin, nobody uses it, and you're like, well, actually, a lot of people are using it. And he's like, what? Like, he was totally floored that Litecoin had any usage at all.
I'm not sure if it was John Carvalho, but definitely Peter Todd.
Peter Todd. Maybe it was Peter Todd, yeah.
Peter Todd said, yeah, nobody uses Litecoin. And I said, it's number one on BitPay. And he said, oh, I got to question the statistics from BitPay. I don't trust them. John Carvalho used to work for Bitrefill, so he's very much aware, first of all, that Charlie is an investor in that company. And secondly, that Litecoin always got a lot of action on Bitrefill. There are a lot of customers using that service and paying with Litecoin. So I don't think he would make this sort of mistake. He very much understands this.
Did you look at Matt Alberg's posts recently from Bitrefill? Because we had him on last week, and it was a fairly long episode, like this one is too. But yeah, that was I was a really eye opener talking him through that, because it really was. You look at it; it's stable. It's basically stable coins, Bitcoin and Litecoin, where the vast majority, maybe in Ethereum, I guess, would be on there just plain Ethereum. That was 80%, and Litecoin, I want to say, is maybe half of what Bitcoin is on there. And I don't know. I'm not someone to sit here and say Litecoin is going to flip Bitcoin, whatever that means. But in usage, I think Litecoin is absorbing users and growing consistently, because it can, right? Bitcoin's restricted. You can only have so many transactions on a day anyway. So at some point in time, Litecoin can just surpass them just because they have the more block space. So that day will come. And I think having people who have built those habits of using it, like you said earlier, why would I go back? Like, what am I gaining by switching back to Bitcoin? And as people who are proponents and believers in something, Litecoin being the thing we believe in, we should be in that mindset all the time. I think that's a very healthy place to be, saying if Litecoin grows and fees go up, or it becomes too slow or more difficult to use in other chains, we should be thinking about how are we going to answer that and address it, rather than just digging your heels in and going, well, I don't have to change. They can change. They're the stupid ones. Like that's literally the marketing philosophy, is like, everyone else is an idiot if they don't use Bitcoin. That's again, not how the real world works. That's not how businesses are run. You should be always thinking about who your consumers are and how do you service their need without, you don't want to sacrifice certain principles, of course, but you have to think what do they call that? They have adversarial thinking. So do you think people, what will bring people back? If you were a person who used Bitcoin and had a couple times, or you ran into a $5 fee and you started using Litecoin, or maybe it's a stable coin instead of Bitcoin, what would be your pitch to somebody to say, this is why you should be using Bitcoin over what you're currently using?
Well, so far it's only been this performance against the US dollar, right? People said, oh, look, during the bull market, Bitcoin is the first one to moon. Then a bunch of people sell their Bitcoin to pump their altcoins, and then they sell their altcoins. We enter bear markets, and during the bear market, Bitcoin is the one that loses the least of its evaluation against the US dollar. I think that has been the value proposition. You just buy and you hodl, right? And then you pay with your credit card. That's what people like Jimmy Song and Samson Mao are gonna tell you. But
It's
that's not
value.
why. Yeah, that's not why Bitcoin was created. And a lot of people forget this, and it goes back to the rewriting of the narrative, because it seems like this has worked so far, and maybe it will keep on working for a while. But at one point, this price discovery and this expansion in terms of getting bigger and more important people to talk about Bitcoin and promote it, it's gonna end at one point. I think at this point in time, everyone who has access to the internet or watched the news has heard about Bitcoin at least once. And I think the people who wanted to buy Bitcoin, they most likely already bought it. There's gonna be some FOMO. There's gonna be a generation of kids who are gonna be old enough to have bank accounts and buy some Bitcoin. I'm not denying this. There's gonna be another pump with retail money. I'm not questioning this. But how far can you go? We already, so I think every cycle had its wave of celebrities and important people promoting Bitcoin. Back in 2013, you had all the celebrities from among the libertarian camp. And you also had a lot of adoption on Expedia and Steam and Microsoft Store. And it was just this initiative to onboard as many companies as possible. And then they hit the first major bear market. And during that bear market, they had this rewriting of the narrative. They were trying to say, okay, maybe that Bitcoin is not what we expected it to be, but we still have this blockchain thing, right? And we can put stable coins on it, we can put whatever. And then you had the entire blockchain, not Bitcoin narrative in 2017 and 2018 with lots of ICOs and altcoins emerging. And of course, most of them failed because they had bad underlying ideas or the founders just wanted to get rich. But after this, you had a re-rationalization of the space. You had the block size wars, you had a major fork, and people tried to explain once again what Bitcoin is and what it's useful for. And they went back to the digital gold narrative, but they also said we're gonna have the Lightning Network, which is gonna be the most important way to scale. Of course, we're also gonna have side chains, but instead of the side chain, we got Liquid, which is a federation, and I'm happy that Blockstream got punished for it because they half-assed their own invention and they gave up on trying to create a sidechain. They just made the federation of large exchanges that basically are the gatekeepers of the system, and they never went anywhere. And they moved their goalposts all the time. At first, they wanted to be the scaling layer for Bitcoin when the fees get high. Then they said, this is just for exchanges to basically transact without triggering these whale bots. And then they realized that the exchanges actually enjoy triggering whale bots because that's how they manipulate prices. And people generate a lot of noise and speculation whenever that happens and they make money off of it. And then they said, we can make tokens and we could always make tokens. So what if we tokenize Wall Street? Or what if we make a partnership with the government of El Salvador to put bonds from volcano mining on our sidechain? So that's how it kept narrowing its scope, but it's still not getting traction. At one point, it even had its own NFT marketplace, and that one never really caught on. And I know it because I was using it. It was called Rare Toshi.
I remember that.
I did use that. I did have some fun with it, but it never caught on because basically it was always behind Ethereum, and Ethereum was building something and they were trying to bring that on Liquid under the pretense that you're using BTC, the currency, and you also have some confidentiality for your transactions, but the market didn't care. It did not move the needle. You just had maybe 50, 100 new users who got excited and brought some more users, but nobody cared for it. And it goes back to the narrative for Bitcoin, right? Because we always try to re-explain it and redefine it according to what's happening. And I think the most major pivotal point in recent history was when Michael Saylor came around and said, I'm just going to buy a lot of it. And you forget about your cypherpunk roots. You forget about wanting this to be private. You forget about even cheap transactions on second layers. Who cares about that?
Yeah.
Maybe that there is some Saylor interview where he says something nice about the Lightning Network, but I'm pretty sure that he never cared for that.
No,
Well, he
I
talked
think
about
your
developing
push
his
for,
own. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, I think your push for privacy is extremely important. I think I know Naomi Brockwell is also pushing for it. She always has been, but like, as you said earlier, like the time is right. I feel like people are primed more than ever to take their privacy seriously, to divorce themselves from centralized networks like Facebook, right? And I think that that's something that Bitcoiners need to hear too. They need to realize that Lightning isn't super private, right? At least it could be private for the sender, but the receiver is almost never private. And yeah, like if you look at El Salvador and their success with Chivo, right? Well, they pretty much imposed it on their populace.
Was that a success?
I mean, it depends how you look at it. Like I have a theory that like their whole gang cleanup wouldn't have been made possible without the Chivo wallet. I feel like the timing is very coincidental. How they released Chivo with a $30 incentive to download and spend like a few or maybe 6 months prior to them starting to incarcerate like how much of the population, like 2% or something um,
Mhm.
of the population. I feel like the way they did it, pretty like I don't know how actually I heard it was pretty nonviolent. Like they would go into camps at night while they were sleeping. Like how did they know everyone was asleep? Like how did they know this is where they were all hanging out? I feel like it's very possible, and I hope it doesn't get me in trouble with any three-letter agencies. But I feel like it's possible they put a Trojan on that Chivo wallet, and it allowed them to listen to everyone, or at least to see where the money was going. Right? Like if someone got $30 and they were like, yeah, spend it wherever. First thing maybe a drug addict would do is go to their dealer, and so immediately you have like a dusting of the whole network, the whole drug network, right? From this one app. We're going to make it extremely simple for the government to just go and clean it up, sweep up all the drug dealers.
That is interesting timing. You're right. Well, and I do kind of want to wrap this up so we don't get to too long. Although I give you an idea of the numbers here, guys. I don't know if you can see. We have 650 people watching. 652, 649 are on Twitter, and 3 are on YouTube. So I think we've settled the conversation of like where should we be putting our content. Although it probably has a lot to do with Vlad's followers, but the privacy thing. What really struck me with Robbie's interview. Robbie Coleman in our discussion about renaming MWeb to VPM or referring to as VPM. We'll call it like a rebranding or whatever you want to call it. Is he said that there's 1.8 billion users of VPNs today. And so when I think about it from terms of reaching out and communicating with people, that they understand privacy being valuable in terms of maybe what you're browsing on the internet, that they don't want their devices listening to them, that they don't want to be arrested for posting something on Facebook. They see this, they don't want to be shut down like in Brazil for their X account. So that message rings much truer to a broader audience than digital gold. Like there's not a lot of gold investors. People, when you start to talk about here's how you win, you can gain money, it starts to feel like a sales pitch to them, right? Like, oh, you can invest in real estate or whatever other scammy thing that's ever come across the internet, multi-level marketing. If you're just like, just buy this thing, it'll go up, you're going to get rich. They start going, well, why? Like, they just feel like it's a scam, even if it isn't a scam, right? And I think the privacy thing speaks to somebody on a level of, I'm actually trying to, here's something that can provide value to you beyond just you're going to get rich. Like this is a very real thing. You understand VPNs, you understand why privacy is important. So here's this tool you can use that actually benefits you and not just pumps my bags.
That
that's
can actually
ultimately
be cool if you can make some integrations with these VPNs and have a VPM button where basically you're able to purchase some coins directly in your Mimblewimble address. And then you can spend these coins online. The problem is you hit the bottleneck of merchant adoption.
They don't have to. This is the trick of MWeb. That if Bitrefill has an LTC address, I can send my VPM coins to Bitrefill because I peg out on my side. So they receive on-chain Litecoin. They're none the wiser.
And if it goes over a certain amount, they'll probably ask you to, I guess, justify a KYC, right? Like, but if it's under $1,000, probably no issue.
But yeah, that's a perfect example. I know it's what Robbie. I don't remember what he talked. I think he talked about that's something they'd like to do is get something going with a VPN where it translates so easily. And people, like I said, my 11-year-old daughter, she knows what a VPN is because she watches YouTube and all the creators talk about, half of them, that's one of the things they advertise as a VPN. Like when she was 8, I remember she came downstairs and she was like, we got to get a VPN. We got to get NordVPN. I'm like, what do you care about NordVPN? You're 8 years old. But she just had told, like, so many creators talked about it that she thought it was something you had to have, right? Like, that just shows you how powerful the repetition in the advertising is, that someone that she doesn't even understand the benefit of it, but she just believes that it's something we should have because it's so critical. So, yeah, I mean, I appreciate what you're doing for privacy. Go get. There's a new. So this is the original one. This one's
Yeah,
signed
that's
by
the
Charlie,
July
actually.
edition. This is the August edition.
Okay, so the August edition has, what's the change in it?
Well, one that you notice immediately is that
The L.
you have an L on the shoulder of this muscle guy.
Yep.
Oh
Yep.
man.
And it also says August at the bottom. And there are some typos that were fixed, and there's
Okay.
something which was completed. For example, one of the mining pools was added because previously it was not in the article dedicated to which mining pool you should use. I think I've also
Okay.
corrected some stuff from this article about choosing your best wallet, because in the version that you have, the green ticks were showing as empty white boxes for some reason.
Oh yeah. Yep. I see that.
So I fixed that. You can find this on GitHub. I made a repository for it. You can download this for free. Go to bitcoin-takeover.com/litecoin and you're going to be able to get the free PDF. But if you want to get the files that allow you to create your own copy with cover and every page, you go to github.com. I think it's /vladec/litecoin something. Just search for Litecoin magazine and you're gonna find this. I'm not aware of any magazines about Litecoin being published right now. When I was I didn't mention this, it was a long interview, but back in 2018, I was a volunteer for the Litecoin Foundation and also wrote the first 5 or 6 newsletter articles for the Litecoin Foundation. And there was a magazine that was only published online that was called Light Life, LITELIFE, and I published an article in every issue of that one. You can still find on Twitter the account. It had this silver bull on the cover. It was pretty cool,
Okay.
but I did write for that one. And I've been with the Litecoin community for a while. So I was interested in this. And then I became once again interested in it after you added MWeb. I think that's so groundbreaking. And even if you don't call it MWeb anymore, that's what I'm going to call it. I think
That's all right. You
it's a
knocked
cooler
yourself
name.
out.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere for sure.
I think it'll be a mark. It's a mark between whether you were here pre 2024 or not, right? If you call it MWeb, you were a Litecoin OG.
No, you're
But
not.
yeah, no, I mean,
You're a
it's been
Litecoin
great.
OG
I
if you
mean,
bought it below $10, but
yeah, I
that's
mean,
besides the
it's
point.
been great to watch, to see that you're open to this stuff. And, as Litecoiners, we obviously feel starved for attention sometimes. And it's like, we just sit here and think, what? I don't understand what all the vitriol's for. This is a perfectly usable tool all over the world. So why the hate? But, we're in that environment. And I think your willingness to say, like, hey, there's use for these other things, whether it's Zcash or Monero, or I think you even have Xano on there, which maybe Xano. Yeah. So I just think that's cool, and I appreciate what you're doing. So
I'm
go check
basically
out.
short story. Adam Back told me that I don't know what I want when I say Bitcoin should have privacy, and I'm gonna lose a lot of money if I go into privacy coins. And I told him, F you, Adam Back. I'm gonna create this index approach to investing in privacy coins, and I'm gonna
Hey, wait.
outperform Bitcoin.
All roads in Bitcoin lead to FU Adam Back, right?
I don't know about that. It's just that he had this condescending parental attitude that
Yeah.
I hate. It's when someone acts like that, like I know better, just stand down and forget about it. Sit down, not stand down. Sit down and forget it. And I was like, I'm I'm stubborn.
Yeah.
I can do stuff and I can prove to you that you're wrong. And so far I think I outperformed Bitcoin by like 60-70% over the last 7 weeks.
That's funny.
And people say, oh, just lower your time preference, blah blah blah. on the long term, it's all going to zero against BTC. And I'm saying, let's see about this, because I'm not aware of any other time in history when privacy was so necessary. It's not just a luxury. It's not just something to show off and say, look at me, I transact with privacy. It's something that people actually need right now. And by virtue of my status of a privileged white man who's living in a European country, I'm investing in privacy. And I'm speculating that in the future, there's going to be a lot more demand for it. So thank you very much, woke people.
Yeah.
That's true.
No,
It
and
is
thank
the
you,
woke.
Vlad, because honestly, like it feels sometimes like I'm taking crazy pills, you know, and having someone like you come to, I guess, voice similar opinions and defend, I guess, us against the maxis.
No,
You
I'm a
know,
maxi. They're not. They're conservatives. That's what
but
I call
you're
them.
irrational. I want to say you're rational maxi.
No, I'm the original type of maxi, which was all about improving Bitcoin. If there's anything interesting, you bring it to Bitcoin after you experiment with it on altcoins. That's what I believe in still.
Okay.
How
Right.
long do
But
you give it though? Like,
I
let's
don't
say
know.
you love MWeb, you think it's great, and everything about it, it's worked for 5 years on Litecoin. You go, there's zero reason for us not to do this. Like, why wouldn't we? Like, how
But I
long do you
did
wait before
interview
you're
Andrew
like, you know what, I just
Polstra.
give up?
I did
Huh?
interview Andrew Polstra on my show, and he's the creator of MWeb. He came up
Yeah.
with this idea 6 or 7 years ago.
Right.
And I asked him, what do you think about this? And he said, oh, it's nice that these Litecoin people have built it, but I think right now Bitcoin is heading towards a post Taproot world with TapScript and Opcat and stuff like this. And I'm like, okay, he gave up. He's not interested in this anymore. And someone asked me, I don't recall exactly who, but they told me, oh, since you had Andrew Polstra on your show, can you invite him to the Litecoin Summit? And he said he's not interested or he's busy or something. But the point is
Right.
that the guy who came up with the concept of putting Mimblewimble on a Bitcoin extension block basically gave up on it. And it's beautiful that Litecoin picked it up as opposed to something else which was easier to use and had more tooling. You built something very beautiful. And I know it took a long time and it was not easy. And by the time it was built, I think the initial hype was over. I was one of the people who reported that Litecoin is going to get confidential transactions back in 2018. And I remember
Mhm.
very well that day because it was important for me. And I also created the thumbnail and everything else for the article. I was working for Crypto Insider. And I was very excited for this to happen. It did not happen until 4 years later, at least not on the mainnet, but I did follow the development. I was part of that torch that people passed around. And I
Mhm.
still believe that it's pretty good. It's not Monero level, it's not Zcash level, but for something that's only a soft fork that gets added on top, it gives you privacy and it gives you extra scalability. And if
It
you
can walk in both worlds, right? It can walk in the corporate world, the light, and it can go into the dark in the privacy world. And I think that's for me one of its greatest assets.
there's nothing dark about privacy, trust me.
Well, I mean, I'm just trying to, yeah, okay, but I'm trying to contrast the two, I guess, in a simple way. But yeah, like in, I don't know, how else would you put it, in the corporate world and the private world?
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
it's
way they
beautiful.
built it, it did take a while, but the way it came out, I think, is great. I actually had something this week. There was somebody on Twitter, and they were asking asking for like a donation. It was a Dogecoiner, and I just kind of curious how much money have they received, and like that basic functionality of I can go take this address and just go see what their ins and outs have been. That's to me where we're so far by being able to just post an MWeb address and not have to worry about that. I think is huge. To me, that's the number one gain in my opinion is not having to advertise what's been received to an address. I just think that's such a blatant problem.
There's
That
also
I'm,
cool, so let me plug your sponsor, Cake Wallet. They built silent payments for Bitcoin, and there's no reason to not bring that into Litecoin. Basically, it means that you can have this static address that generates a different address each time you send to it. And people watching from the outside, they cannot tell how many transactions you received and how much money you have. It's just people sending you money they can track it on the public blockchain. But it's a pretty nice way to hide from just lurkers.
Yeah.
So one address that you can publish
Yeah.
that automatically generates, I guess, different wallets or
different addresses every
different
time
addresses.
you send to it.
Right, in the same wallet. Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, guys. I gotta actually go pick up my daughter, so I gotta go. But 700 people. This is pretty good. We're gonna have to do this again, Animal. And thanks.
Yeah. Thanks,
Vlad,
Vlad. Yeah, you should
for the
come play
bump.
more often.
The Vlad
Also,
bump.
get a Pepe by my girlfriend.
Oh, I am gonna do
think-
that.
Yeah, you're the only one from
Does
I
she want
guess
to take
the more
this?
active Litecoin participants who don't have a Pepe yet. Charlie has one.
Let me think. how I
Animal
wanna
has
look.
one. The Lion guy has one. There are a
I gotta
bunch
think
of
how I
them.
want to look. How do I want to look in it? I could be up for it.
The way you look in this episode, I guess.
Yeah, she could try that if she wants. Have
Yeah,
the
the
guitars
microphone
back
and stuff.
there and the mic, like up here maybe. And I'm like screaming or something. She can do whatever she wants with it. She could use. I got a gap in the tooth. She could like caricature that, you know.
No, the Pepe has his own lips.
Oh, does he? He doesn't have teeth. All right.
No teeth, no nose.
Oh, that's good for me. I got a big nose. All right. Well, hey guys, thanks again. I'll get this put up somewhere. But yeah, it was a great conversation, Vlad. And maybe we'll try to maybe have you back in a few months or something once we can talk about patents and stuff like that or something. All right. All right. I'm gonna end it
Thank
here.
you, sir.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks